Maintenance of the compost. Time to turn your compost. Composting should be fun. Invite your friends and family, especially the children, to help. Explain why you are composting to your helpers and encourage them to do the same. Objectives. At the end of this class, you'll be able to identify the tools and materials required for turning the compost pile. Turn the compost pile in the right way. Before we learn the procedure of turning the compost pile, let's familiarise ourselves with the tools and materials required for it. The tools required for turning the pile are rake, shovel, pan, garden fork, pitchfork and spade. The materials required for turning the compost pile are greens, which include food waste, fresh grass clippings, fruit or vegetable scraps and garden waste. Browns, which include cardboard, straw, dry leaves and wood chips. Cow dung slurry, water, bucket and baskets. Now let's see the procedure for turning the compost pile. It's necessary to turn the pile once a week for 6 to 8 weeks to aerate until the compost is ready. This hot compost pile is 2 weeks old. It has been already turned once. Now the materials are unrecognisable except for the ones that were on the sides. It's time we turned it. Turning the pile helps you to check the temperature, moisture, volume and odour as you dig in and make necessary corrections. This is especially done on the first 2 times you turn the pile, so week 1 and week 2. Do you need more volume? You will find that the pile has sunk. If more than 25% of volume is lost, add more ingredients. Do you need more moisture? If needed, add moisture. Did your pile get hot? If not, why? Is it too wet? If too wet, add more dry browns. Is it too dry? If too dry, add more greens, like food waste. There isn't enough nitrogen? If not enough nitrogen, add greens. Cow dung slurry is especially a good ingredient of nitrogen. Adding cow dung, the pile will get hot very fast. Did the pile become anaerobic? If so, why? Is it too hot? Is it too wet? This is the last time that you would add new material if it is too wet or too dry, or to increase the volume. But after 2 weeks, you don't add any new material. When you turn and mix the pile, you turn the outsides to the middle, turn the top to the bottom, mix up the layers, and break up clumps where air cannot circulate. Thus, when you are turning, you are also mixing. Let's start turning the pile. Step 1. Remove the sticks and the tarp from the top of the compost bin. Then remove the tarp that protects the pile from the rain. Remove the coconut fronds and sticks that were arranged on top of the bin. They were so arranged in order that the tarp would fit the bin loosely, thereby allowing air circulation. Step 2. Remove the temperature stick and check the temperature. Now remove the temperature stick and feel the temperature of the pile. It will be hot. If the pile is hot, then it needs to be turned to aerate it. It would have used up all the oxygen in the pile, so it needs to be aerated. Step 3. Remove the compost bin and place it next to the pile. Remove the stakes from the bin one by one. Lift the bin off the compost pile and place it right next to the pile. You might need 2 people to do this task. If you are alone, then you may unstitch the bin and then stitch it back together again after turning the pile. Set up the bin right next to the pile by hammering the stakes into the ground. Step 4. Arrange stick on the bottom of the bin for aeration. Then arrange sticks on the bottom of the bin for aeration. This is the new layer of air tunnels which needs to be made. Step 5. Refill the bin with compost. So then start refilling the bin with the compost. Take from the top of the pile and put it into the newly set up bin. The top of the compost pile will probably be dry, so at this point we may add slurry into the turned pile. There are 3 methods of refilling the bin with compost: with gloved hands, with baskets, and with tools. Step 6. Do the squeeze test when you get to the middle of the pile and add browns or greens as per needed. Once you get to the middle of the pile, do the squeeze test to check the moisture level in the pile. If it is wet, then you may add browns like shredded paper, and if it is dry, you may add more greens. The top middle is usually expected to be dry. As expected in this case also, it is dry, so add food waste and cow dung slurry. Mind you, it is allowed to add these materials only because it is 2 weeks old. Had the pile been more than 2 weeks old, you are allowed to add only water and no slurry, and no more other materials. Step 7. Continue refilling the bin. Start refilling the bin to cover the food waste and the cow dung slurry. You may use tools like a pitchfork and a garden fork. A tip to remember: the garden fork and pitchfork are useful in the beginning as the materials are somewhat still intact, but after 3 weeks the materials will have broken down, so tools like a pitchfork and garden fork would be rendered useless as everything would just fall through. At such a stage one must use tools like a shovel, baskets, etc. Step 8. Break the clumps if you encounter any. If you encounter clumps, then break them down in the new pile. Clumps are usually found in the middle as it is moister there and there is no room for air. For example, materials like greens and a blob of food waste may get clumped together in the middle. The edges are usually drier and cooler, and they act as an insulator for the middle. Step 9. Add more ingredients to increase the volume of the compost pile. As 25% of the volume of the pile is lost, we add more ingredients like paper and wood chips. And because it is dry, we add cow dung slurry. Mind you, it is allowed to add these materials only because it is 2 weeks old. Had the pile been more than 2 weeks old, you are allowed to add only water and no slurry, and no more other materials, even if the volume of the pile shrinks. Keep turning the pile and filling the bin. Keep filling the bin, and a tip to remember: at the end it would be easier to use a shovel or a spade to get things in the bin. Continue turning the pile, adding moisture as needed. Now we are adding plain water, as enough of cow dung slurry has already been added. Continue until all of the contents are in the bin. Another tip to remember: at the end maybe you might want to use a rake to collect all the scattered compost on the ground, and a pan may also come in handy to grab the small amounts of leftover compost. Step 11. Finally, add the last dry brown layer. Insert the temperature stick and cap the bin with a tarp. Remove the original sticks from the bottom and place them aside. Now recap the new pile with 4 inches of fluffy brown layer. Here we are using wood chips to make this layer. Replace the temperature stick or compost thermometer. Place the coconut fronds and sticks on top of the bin so that the tarp is held loosely and there is enough air circulation. Now place the tarp on top of the arranged coconut fronds and sticks. Then place the sticks on top of the tarp so that it does not blow away. If after 2 weeks, when turning the pile is not hot, then maybe it is too dry, or there is not enough nitrogen, or way too wet. If it's too dry, and then there is not enough nitrogen, then add more greens like food waste and cow dung. Cow dung is rich in nitrogen. The pile will get hot very fast. Food waste and paper decomposes faster, while wood chips take a longer time to break down. With that, we come to the end of this class. Let's recall what we have learnt. When you turn and mix the pile, you turn the outsides to the middle, turn the top to the bottom, mix up the layers, and break up clumps where air cannot circulate. You also learnt the right way of turning the compost pile. Let's review its basic steps. Step 1. Remove the sticks and the tarp from the top of the compost bin. Step 2. Remove the temperature stick and check the temperature. Step 3. Remove the compost bin and place it next to the pile. Step 4. Arrange stick on the bottom of the bin for aeration. Step 5. Refill the bin with compost. Step 6. Do the squeeze test when you get to the middle of the pile and add browns or greens as needed. Step 7. Continue refilling the bin. Step 8. Break the clumps if you encounter any. Step 9. Add more ingredients to increase the volume of the compost pile. Step 10. Keep turning the pile and filling the bin. Step 11. Finally add the last dry brown layer, insert the temperature stick and cap the bin with a tarp. You have now learnt the maintenance of the compost. Take our next class to learn how to troubleshoot while composting.